I still remember the exact moment the chairman's wife laughed at me in front of 200 people. It was the kind of laugh meant to travel. Sharp, polished, just loud enough to turn heads without seeming uncivilized. One second, I was standing beside a candlelit VIP table in a navy silk dress, my event badge clipped discreetly at my waist, and the next, every investor within 20 feet was looking at me like I had wandered in from catering. The woman laughing was Celeste Waverly, wife of Orion Vale's chairman, and the self-appointed queen of every room she entered. She held a champagne flute between two manicured fingers and looked me up and down with open amusement. "Oh," she said, smiling at the guests around her. "I thought this seat was reserved for actual executives." A few people chuckled. I felt heat climb into my face, but I didn't move. The ballroom at the Halston Grand was all gold light and glass walls with a live jazz trio playing near the stage and camera crews tucked into corners for the investor broadcast. Everything about that night had been designed to signal power. The centerpieces were white orchids. The waiters wore black gloves. The company logo rotated across two giant screens above the room like it was already celebrating victory. And right there in the middle of it, Celeste decided I was part of the decor she didn't approve of. "I'm in the correct seat," I told her calmly. Her smile widened. "Sweetheart, this table is for senior leadership, board members, and capital partners, not assistants." That got a bigger laugh. I glanced at the place card in front of me. It simply said E. Carter, because that was how I'd asked it to be printed. Neutral, unremarkable, easy. At that moment, they still had no idea who I really was. A man to Celeste's left, one of the company's regional vice presidents, I think, looked at my badge and smirked. "Maybe she's here to take notes. Or collect empty glasses," another man added. I heard it. So did everyone else. I should probably explain something before I go any further. My name is Emily Carter. I was 32 then, and for almost 8 years I'd worked in structured private capital. My job title sounded boring enough to make people stop asking follow-up questions. Director of Transaction Governance at Calder Ridge Capital. What that actually meant was simpler and more dangerous. When our firm backed a deal, I was the final internal authority who confirmed whether the money could legally move. Not the founder, not the public-facing managing partner. Me, that wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't meant to be. Firms like ours do that on purpose. The loud people go on panels and give interviews. The quiet people read the clauses that can stop billions of dollars cold. Orion Vale Systems was desperate for our funding. They needed the first release of a multi-billion-dollar capital package to stabilize a merger, roll over debt, and keep a very ugly liquidity problem from becoming public. Officially, the night was a celebration. Unofficially, it was a life raft with crystal centerpieces. But I hadn't come there to announce any of that. I came because our senior partner was overseas, our legal lead had been delayed in D.C., and I wanted to see the room for myself before signing off on final release in the morning. I also came exactly the way I usually did, without an entourage, without a dramatic introduction, without the kind of visible status symbols that made insecure people behave themselves. That was my mistake. Celeste set her glass down and looked at the empty chair again. "You know what? Let's make this easy. This seat is reserved for Mr. Halpern from Westbridge Sovereign. You can stand at the back until someone tells you where staff should go." I looked at her. I was invited to this table. She gave a tiny shrug. Then someone made an administrative error. The executive beside her didn't even try to hide his grin. I could feel eyes on me from the neighboring tables now. Conversations had quieted. Even the jazz felt farther away. Humiliation is strange like that. It narrows the entire world down to the exact patch of floor you're standing on. Still, I kept my voice level. "You may want to reconsider how you handle this." That should have been a warning. Instead, it amused her. "Oh, I'm sorry," Celeste said, leaning closer. "Are you threatening me?" Before I could answer, a security guard appeared near the table. Then a second. She hadn't even turned around. Someone must have signaled them. Celeste crossed one leg over the other and smiled like she was doing me a favor. Please escort her out of the VIP section. Quietly. There was a little murmur around the table. Not disapproval, excitement. One of the guards stepped toward me. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us. I stared at him for a second, then at Celeste. Are you sure, I asked softly, that this is the decision you want recorded tonight? For the first time, her expression shifted, but only slightly. Annoyance, not caution. What exactly is that supposed to mean? She said. I didn't answer. Because the real twist came a few seconds later when one of the company's senior finance officers looked up from across the table, saw my face clearly, and went completely pale. And that's when everything started to change. The first person in that room to realize what was happening was Daniel Rains, Orion Vale's CFO. He had been half turned toward another investor, smiling through some conversation about quarterly debt restructuring when his eyes landed on me. I watched the recognition hit him in stages. Confusion, doubt, then full sickening clarity. He stood up so abruptly his chair legs scraped across the marble floor. Wait, he said. The room quieted even more. Celeste looked irritated. Daniel, we're handling it. No, he said, sharper this time. No, you're not. Both security guards paused. Daniel was already moving around the table. His face had lost color so fast it was almost gray under the ballroom lights. Behind him, the company's general counsel, Priya Shah, rose too, one hand still holding a folder against her chest. Celeste frowned. What is wrong with everybody? Daniel stopped a few feet from me. Ms. Carter, he said carefully, almost breathlessly. I'm so sorry. That sentence changed the air. You could feel it move through the room. Guests who had been smirking a second before suddenly looked uncertain. Phones lowered. A man near the stage turned around completely. Priya came forward next, her expression grim and tight. Emily, she said quietly. I didn't know you'd arrived. I looked at her. Clearly? Celeste stared at both of them, then at me. Can someone explain why our CFO is apologizing to a girl who tried to seat herself at the investor table? Daniel closed his eyes for half a second, like he was praying for patience. Because, he said, she is the investor table. That landed so hard even the people at the next table went silent. Celeste laughed once, but it sounded different now. Forced. Excuse me? Priya stepped in before Daniel could speak again. This is Emily Carter from Calder Ridge Capital. She is the final approving authority on the Horizon financing package. No one moved. I remember the exact expression on Celeste's face then. It wasn't embarrassment yet. It was resistance. The human mind hates bad news when pride is involved. For a few seconds, she genuinely seemed to believe there had been some mistake that would still somehow preserve her dignity. The approving authority? She repeated. She looks like... Priya cut her off. Like someone you should not have humiliated on a live investor stream. That was the line that made the room exhale. You could hear whispers starting everywhere. Oh my God. Is she serious? Is that the Capitol representative? I turned slightly and saw, across the ballroom, one of the overhead screens still showing muted rotating shots from the event. The cameras had absolutely caught enough. Maybe not every word, but enough. At that moment, they still hoped this could be fixed. Orion Vale's CEO, Graham Voss, appeared less than a minute later. He had been near the stage with two sovereign fund delegates when someone obviously pulled him aside. He approached quickly, smile already gone, jaw tense in a way that told me he understood the danger before he knew the full facts. Emily, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for being here tonight. I let him hold that gesture there for a moment before I shook it. His palm was cold. Graham looked from me to Celeste, to the security guards, then to Daniel. What happened? No one answered immediately. Celeste lifted her chin. There was confusion about seating. That's a beautiful euphemism, I said. Her face hardened. Graham turned to the guards. Step back. They did. The entire room was pretending not to listen now, which of course meant everyone was listening. The investors at the neighboring tables had gone still in that deliberate, polished way wealthy people do when they sense catastrophe and don't want to miss it. Graham lowered his voice. Emily, I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. I looked at him for a second. Your chairman's wife mocked me in front of your guests, called security, and tried to have me removed from a table I was assigned to. That's not a misunderstanding. That's governance risk. I will never forget the way those words hit Daniel and Priya. Both of them knew exactly what I was referring to, because buried inside the financing agreement was a conduct and reputational integrity clause. Most people never pay attention to those sections. They skim to the numbers, the valuation, the release schedule. But that clause mattered to me. I had insisted on expanded language after another company, 2 years earlier, had imploded because of executive misconduct caught on video before funding closed. The clause was simple in spirit. If senior leadership or their affiliates engaged in documented conduct that materially undermined trust in the transaction, Calder Ridge had the right to suspend or withdraw release. Not discuss, not reconsider. Suspend. And that's when everything started to change. Priya spoke first, very quietly. We should move this conversation to a private room. I smiled a little. Interesting. A minute ago I was being removed from the room. Celeste opened her mouth, but Graham turned on her so fast she stopped. Not. Another. Word. That got everyone's attention. He looked back at me, trying to recover control. Please, let's talk privately. I considered it, then nodded once. We were escorted, not by security this time, which was almost funny, to a glass-walled executive lounge off the ballroom. Graham, Daniel, Priya, and I went in first. A minute later, Celeste tried to follow, but Priya stopped her at the door. No, she said. Not this discussion. Celeste's face went white with fury. Inside, the music from the ballroom became a dull vibration through the walls. Graham shut the door, turned to me, and tried diplomacy again. Emily, what do you need from us to move forward? I sat down slowly and set my clutch on the table. The truth was I already knew the answer. Because while they were still thinking about apologies, optics, and damage control, I was thinking about the claws, the cameras, and what kind of leadership reveals itself when it thinks no one important is watching. And the real twist came when I finally opened the financing binder, turned to one page, and watched all three of them realize the deal was standing over a cliff. I slid the financing binder across the table and opened it to section 11.4. Daniel didn't even need to read the heading. He knew. Priya leaned in anyway, scanning the text with a tightening jaw. Graham stayed standing for a second too long before finally sitting down across from me. Conduct and reputational impairment, I said. Expanded trigger language. Final revision requested by Calder Ridge. No one interrupted. I tapped the page with one finger. Documented actions by senior leadership, board representatives, or affiliated public figures that materially damage confidence in the transaction, counterparties, or governance environment may justify immediate suspension or permanent withdrawal of capital authorization. Graham rubbed a hand over his mouth. Emily? No, I said softly. Let's not do the version where you tell me this isn't who you are. Tonight is exactly who you are. The only reason this feels unusual is because this time it happened in front of investors. That landed. Priya closed the binder halfway, then opened it again like she wanted the wording to change on its own. The clause requires material damage. It also requires judgment, I said. Which is mine. Silence. Graham leaned forward. Celeste is not an executive. No, I said. She's worse. She's an unofficial power center with public access, internal influence, and no discipline, which means your governance problem is cultural, not personal. For the first time, Daniel actually looked impressed. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I was angry, yes, but colder than angry. I had spent too many years in rooms like that watching polished people decide in 5 seconds who deserved respect and who didn't. The only difference that night was that they had humiliated the wrong woman. Graham tried one more time. We can issue an immediate statement, remove her from all public-facing involvement, and address this with the board. Tonight, I asked. Yes. After a live humiliation, a public removal attempt, and visible executive silence, he said nothing, because that was the part they couldn't undo. Not Celeste's sneer. Not the laughter. Not the fact that several people at that table had joined in before anyone bothered to ask who I was. The deal hadn't been endangered by one cruel woman. It had been exposed by a room full of entitled people who assumed power only ever arrived wearing the costumes they respected. I folded my hands on the table. At Calder Ridge, we fund numbers, I said, but we also fund leadership. Tonight I got to see yours. Priya's voice dropped. Emily, if this deal collapses, the merger unwinds. Debt repricing alone could trigger a ratings event. I know. Daniel stared at the table. If the first tranche doesn't release by Friday, we breach. I know that too. Graham looked at me with the kind of desperation powerful men hate showing. Then why are we still talking like this can't be repaired? I held his gaze. Because you still think the problem is that I was insulted, I said. It's not. The problem is that your company revealed in public that it confuses status with authority and arrogance with leadership. Investors don't forget moments like that, neither do I. And that's when everything started to collapse. Daniel's phone buzzed first, then Priya's, then Graham's. I didn't need to check mine. I already knew what it would say because 10 minutes earlier, while they were still scrambling in the ballroom, I had sent a short message to our operations desk. Hold authorization pending governance review. Freeze release sequencing. Not a full withdrawal yet. Just enough to stop the blood flow and let panic do its work. Daniel looked at his screen and went still. The release queue's been suspended. Priya swallowed. Investor Relations is asking why the capital notice hasn't gone out. Graham looked up at me. You did this? I nodded once. I paused it. He exhaled sharply, almost a laugh, except there was no humor in it. Emily, we need that funding. I stood. And I needed basic professional respect before I ever walked into your ballroom. For a second, no one spoke. Then Graham stood too. Please don't do this over one incident. I picked up my clutch. You're still calling it one incident. That's exactly why you're losing the deal. I walked to the door and opened it. The hallway outside was lined with people pretending not to stare. Word had already spread. Celeste stood near the far wall, no longer regal, no longer amused, just pale and rigid, with the kind of expression people wear when they realize their social instincts have finally produced a real consequence. When she saw me, she stepped forward. Emily, I didn't know who you were. I stopped and looked at her. That, I said, is the most expensive sentence you'll ever say. I left her there. By midnight, the first rumors had hit the investor circles. By morning, Calder Ridge formally withdrew from the transaction, citing governance concerns and documented reputational impairment during closing events. 2 other participating funds delayed their commitments within hours. Orion Vale's stock dipped before lunch. Business media got hold of clips from the gala by afternoon. Not the whole thing, but enough. Enough to show the laughter. Enough to show security approaching. Enough to show a company's polished mask sliding off in real time. Celeste resigned from all foundation and advisory appearances within the week. Graham kept his job for a while, but not his credibility. Daniel survived, Priya did too. The chairman issued a statement about an unfortunate social misunderstanding, which only made the backlash worse because everyone could tell exactly what kind of people still use phrases like that. And me? I went back to work Monday morning, reviewed 2 infrastructure deals, and signed off on neither. Sometimes people ask if I regretted letting the financing die. No, because revenge doesn't always look like screaming in a ballroom or humiliating someone back. Sometimes it looks like staying perfectly calm while arrogant people destroy themselves with the truth. They tried to remove me from the VIP table like I didn't belong there. In the end, I didn't remove them from a table. I removed billions of dollars from their future. And by the time they realized who I was, it was already too late.